For this video, I'm going to be installing my ARB air compressor behind the rear driver's side seat. And I'm going to run all the wiring through this plug that I found just in front of that seat. There you go, you can see it right there. I'm going to drill that out, run some wires. Stay tuned. Okay, step one, as you can see right here, I've got a 1-inch hole saw. Just trying to loosen that thing up a little bit. I'm not cutting any metal. I'm just kind of grinding down that plastic a bit. Gonna grab a screwdriver here and use it to pry that little plastic plug out. There you go, comes right out. I didn't cut any metal, just plastic. Notice that thermal protection, whatever you want to call it, that was on top of there, gets gummed up a little bit, probably from the heat of that hole saw. So just took a carpet knife, cleaned it up a little bit. Took my hand, pulled some of the gummy kind of stuff away from it. You know, just stuff I didn't want getting in the threads of the wire gland I'm going to put in there. There's a wire gland. That's what's going to go up through the bottom. You can use that, or you could even use some kind of grommet, something like that, but it's pretty sharp in there. You know, even if you're running conduit, you want to avoid those sharp edges there. You don't want to cut your stuff up. You can see it's a pretty tight fit. Got it in there with a little bit of elbow grease. Now I'm just prepping this conduit, putting all the pieces that I need for that wire gland. So that way, once I run it in there, I can just start kind of snugging it up a little bit before I push my wires through. Sorry for the shaky camera work, I'm doing this one-handed. So there you go, you can see you got it in there. Now I'm just kind of hand tightening that little nut that goes on there to keep everything in place. I also have a little bit of a gap in there. That wire gland wasn't 100% sure fit, so taking some silicone caulk here, filling in, it was about a 32nd of an inch on all the way around, nothing too crazy. Really just the threads were about the exact size of the hole, but there's still some gaps, you know, with the threads. So put that stuff in there. Where I'm at most of the time, you know, there's a lot of mud puddles, things like that. I don't want any water shooting up in there. So just an added measure. I doubt even a drop would get in there, and even if it did, big deal. But, you know, after a while, that carpet gets wet, it'll start smelling in there. So just do yourself a favor if you go this route and caulk it up. Takes no time at all. Seal that little hole up. Still going, still packing that stuff in there. Just want to make sure it's in there really good. A little preview of it. And again, just hand tighten these wire glands. Nothing too crazy. I left it a little bit loose because I knew when I started spinning that thing, it's going to get silicone in a more uniform circular fashion around that gap, and that's what I really wanted. So that's why I did it that way. Now I've started to run my wires down through that conduit, just slowly feeding them through there. In this case, it was pretty snug. That's what I wanted it to be. I could have used a bigger conduit, bigger wire gland, but I wanted to be a tight fit for the sake of it being waterproof. Now I'm getting prepped. I've got to splice some wires. The ARB wiring harness wasn't quite long enough for what I was doing. Kind of running the wire somewhat forward rather than towards the bed of my truck. So I just needed another like 4 feet, nothing too crazy, but luckily I had some wire laying around. So you can see me here just taking my time, stripping the wires, getting it spliced real good, make sure it's good connection. That's the worst thing when you're doing wiring. Get everything wired up, it works for a little while, then it stops working. Then you're going through and chasing issues in your wiring. So take the time, do it right, get good, sure connections. And that's just some shrink tubing there. Stuff's great. I like it a lot better than electrical tape. Once it's on there, it's there. It's good to go. Looks like I'm really putting a lot of force on these connectors too. May have mentioned that earlier, but honestly I'm really not. This is real thin gauge wire. Also, that being said, with this ARB wiring harness, sort of the way it works is you have a set of wires that go to a relay and a set of wires that go to a switch. Why that's significant is the one set of wires that go to the relay are a little bit heavier gauge, and they actually go to your power supply. And then the other wires go to the switch, and all that switch does is operate the relay. So you're able to have a lot smaller diameter wire going to the switch because it's not drawing power out of that switch, which is actually kind of awesome. Your main power source runs through a heavier gauge wire. So, but that being said, it can be difficult to find a small enough gauge wire. I believe the ARB switch wiring was like 22 gauge, and the smallest I could find was 18. So pay attention when you're getting butt connectors, especially. Make sure it's connectors that can support a range of gauges if you're going to dissimilar gauges. Also, my handheld butane lighter, I don't know where it went, so I had to use this big bottle here. Just make sure you are a little careful, because that's a lot of heat for such a small thing. You can burn wire, things like that. There you go. Got the shrink tubing on there, heated it up, got a nice secure connection. Everything looks good. Did a little quick inspection just to make sure I had good connector. And just going to repeat the process, nothing fancy. I really just wanted to show this install because you can do this with just a little bit of knowledge. You can watch a YouTube video, you can read the manufacturer's information, install manuals, things like that you can find on their websites. And you can get this stuff done. There's no real reason to take this stuff to a shop. And I'm not any kind of engineer or mechanic by any means, but it's pretty simple. I was able to do it. You can too. Also, I only had a few types of shrink as far as color goes, a few types of shrink tube. I had red, I had, a little fire there. So that's what I was saying. Watch out with that big butane bottle. I had red, I had yellow, blue, but I didn't have any black. So where that's significant is later on in the install, when I got up to the switch panel, I had to use a different color. What I did was I took blue, and then I put a different color tip on it just so I could differentiate between my wire going to my power source and then my wire going to my ground. And here I was just kind of doing a brief inspection and thought it over, did a quick measurement, and realized I could actually join two of those ground wires and it wouldn't be a problem. Here's another thing, a little tip I picked up in a lab I used to work in. This shrink tubing here was basically the perfect diameter for the size wire that I was about to connect. But I knew once I crimped my butt connectors that it wouldn't fit over it because they just form a little bit spread out. So a little tip I picked up from some of the guys I worked with is you can take a pair of needle nose pliers and very gently stretch out that shrink tubing. A little quick measurement there. Nope, not quite there. And you can stretch it out gently with these needle nose pliers and still shrink it down to the original small diameter it was going to go to. And what I mean by that is typical shrink tubing will shrink about a third of its diameter. So if it's 10 inches, it'll shrink a third of that down to 7 inches, somewhere around those lines. But if you stretch it beyond its original diameter, it still shrinks down to that smaller diameter. Hope that's not a confusing explanation, but pretty neat little tip, little trick. Something I've used many times and something that worked out pretty well here. And using the smallest diameter possible to me is preferred. It just adds a little bit more security to your butt connectors as well. Some other notes on this too. I didn't take out a tape measure at all during this whole process. I just, I made my wiring a little bit long. I prefer to do that anyway, especially before I start tying everything into the harness. But I made it a little bit long, and then I'll shorten it as needed, or even maybe leave it long in case I decide to move my switch panel or something like that. I also don't recommend using your teeth. And you saw me there using a carpet knife. I only did that because the diameter of this 6-gauge wire here was a little bit bigger than what my wire strippers can handle. So just use a carpet knife, strip it, no big deal. But yeah, don't use your teeth. Now these connectors here are a clear type connector. I really like these because you can look in there and see where your wiring's at. You don't really have to do it by feel or kind of just think you got in there far enough. You can actually see that you got good depth on your wire. And then when you crimp it, you can tell that you got a good crimp because you can see through that sheath. But they are a little bit higher quality, and also this is a larger diameter wire than what I was using. So you have to really kind of crimp these down, and they make tools that allow you to do it and whatnot. But you can do it with a pair of pliers like I did right there. And you'll see this tubing here, the shrink tube, looks pretty large in diameter because I stretched it out. But once I put the heat on it, it hugs that wire real good. I'm going to try to show you real close here if I can. Close enough anyway. But yeah, you see it shrinking down. It'll contour your connector and really hug your wire good. So just one more, piece of security added to that connector. Once I get all this done, something I didn't get the opportunity to show is I had to snake this underneath my chassis, between the cab and the bed, and then through a hole in my bed that was actually already there. It was just covered by plastic. I just popped a little plastic insert out, and that was kind of a pain. So unfortunately, I didn't film that part. You can see I added, that's actually 6 feet of wire there, and then when I got to here, I had everything ran through my bed where I wanted it. I just measured to a workable length of wire. Again, I could have left it a little longer. I tend to do that because I will reconfigure stuff. And you can see I have a switch panel. That's where that blue light is. It's got my rack lights that I ran a while back are turned on so I can see. It got dark on me pretty quick. To the right of that, there's a fuse panel made by Blue Sea Systems that I'm going to tie everything into. So this is a very redundant system when it comes to fuses. The harness itself has a 50 amp fuse in it. I'm going to run the switch through a fuse. I believe it's a 5 amp fuse. It might even be 15. I can't remember. And then this line here will run through a fuse as well. And also my auxiliary battery is fused through a breaker. It's on like a 45 amp breaker, I believe it is. But again, I didn't measure these. I just kind of eyeballed it. So that's what I was talking about earlier. I put a little yellow tip on there of shrink tubing just to remind myself yellow means caution, so I would know that that's kind of my hot wire. And, you don't have to do that. I mean, I just did it. You could always mark it with tape or a marker or something like that, but I didn't have black and red shrink tubing of the diameter that I needed. So you can see here I left myself a little bit of extra. Again, I'm a big fan of that. You can always S-fold it, zip tie it if it's too long, something like that. You just never know. You might move your fuse panel. You might have a different upgrade where you want to move your switch panel. And in my case, that's just a homemade switch panel. The face of the panel itself is a marine grade switch panel, but the box that it's in is some PVC that I bought and just cut and made a panel. And this Blue Sea Systems fuse box is pretty cool. The top half is fusible. It gives you 8 connections for anything that needs power, basically. And then the bottom half has 8 connections for ground. You can double up the grounds, no big deal if you have to, but you have a total of 8 connections you can make, which is typically plenty for most people. I'm just tying everything in, nothing too exciting. Just kind of wanted to show, again, it's not a very difficult install. One thing I didn't get the opportunity to show because I didn't check my camera and I ran out of memory in my camera was once I got all this hooked up, I didn't actually show it operating. It does work. Got a lot of future trips and adventures out there, so at some point I will get the chance to give a good demo. And I've actually had this compressor for about a year. I just had it in a different location, and once I put in my bed slide and things like that, I had to reconfigure where I was housing some of this stuff, and my compressor being one of them. Those ARB compressors are inherently resistant to the weather and the elements and things like that, but most people do put them somewhere where they have some shielding. I wasn't too fired up about having it in the cab of my truck itself, but there's plenty of room behind the rear seats of your Jeep Gladiator, and honestly, it just protects it, keeps it out of those elements a little bit more. That's pretty much it for the install, though. I would appreciate it if you liked the video, give me a like, and if you really like the video, give me a subscribe. One thing you also don't see on here is all that exposed wiring eventually gets tucked into some conduit. Just dress it up and make it nice, and also protect your wiring a little bit. See you guys on the next one.